Hey everyone, ready to talk motorcycles? Today we're diving into something pretty cool, especially if you're into motorcycles A&D, keeping things eco-friendly.
Sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, right. We're checking out an article from a motorcycle blog. It's all about the Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel and whether it's really a step towards eco-friendly riding, like they say.
I'm curious to hear more about it.
Me too. Okay, so the big thing about this bike is that it runs on E85 fuel. That means it's 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline.
Interesting.
Yeah. And apparently it's the first flex fuel bike that Honda's launched in India.
That's a pretty big deal, especially considering how many people rely on motorcycles there. Could be a sign of things to come.
Totally. It's like they're testing the waters. And I mean, think about it. You're basically powering your ride with plants.
Well, not exactly plant juice, but ethanol is a biofuel made from stuff like corn or sugarcane. Renewable resources.
Oh, right. Way better than fossil fuels, though. But okay, let's get to the fun stuff. How does this eco-friendly ride actually perform?
Yeah, let's hear about it.
Well, the CB300F's got a 293cc engine and a 6-speed gearbox. The article says it's super smooth, especially with the assist and slipper clutch. You know what that means?
Smoother gear changes.
Exactly. Especially in city traffic.
Makes sense. I hate those jerky gear changes.
Yeah, totally. But there's more. This bike also has something called Honda Selectable Torque Control, or HTSC for short.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's like a safety net, especially for slippery surfaces. Imagine you hit a patch of oil, this tech kicks in to help prevent you from skidding.
That's great, especially for newer riders who might not be as experienced. Helps keep things stable by controlling the engine's torque output. Prevents wheel spin.
Right. It's pretty amazing. Okay, but beyond the tech stuff, what about the actual experience of riding this thing? The author of the article talks about how comfortable and easy it was to handle, especially for commutes. They even mentioned a friend with back problems who found it surprisingly comfortable for longer rides.
That's interesting. You don't always hear about comfort being a priority with eco-friendly vehicles. It's like they're proving you can have both a good riding experience and be sustainable.
For sure. And I love that the author made the point that choosing this bike is like making a commitment to cleaner riding.
Yeah, I feel like there's more awareness now than ever about our environmental impact. People are looking for ways to make more sustainable choices in all parts of their lives.
Definitely. And it's cool that it extends to hobbies, too. Like, you can still have fun and be responsible, but it's not just about the engine, you know? This bike's got style. It comes in sports red or matte axis gray metallic.
Ooh, I saw those pictures. They both look pretty awesome.
Yeah. And there's even this little green FlexTech decal they mentioned.
It's like a badge of honor for going green.
Totally. Okay, but before we all run out and buy one, there's some practical things to think about.
Good point. Like what?
Well, for one, the article mentions that finding E85 fuel might not be as easy as regular gas, especially if you're going on a longer trip.
Right. You definitely want to plan your route carefully.
Exactly. Also, it's probably a good idea to get familiar with that torque control feature. Maybe practice in a safe place first so you know how it reacts.
Absolutely. You always want to be comfortable with your bike's features, especially the safety ones.
Agreed. And finally, don't forget that a flex fuel engine might need a little more attention than a regular one, you know, because ethanol can attract moisture.
Right. Regular maintenance is always key, but maybe even more so with a flex fuel engine. Keeps it running smoothly and helps it last longer.
Okay, so we've covered the basics, but I bet you're all wondering some of the same things I am. Like, how far can you actually go on a full tank of E85?
Ah, good question. That's what we call fuel range, and it can vary depending on a lot of factors like how you ride, the type of fuel you're using, even the weather.
Makes sense.
But the article says you can probably expect to get around 250 to 300 kilometers in the city.
Okay, so that's like what, a week's worth of commutes for most people, or a decent weekend trip without needing to refuel?
Yeah, not bad at all.
All right, next question. What exactly is a flex fuel bike anyway? I'm sure some people are new to this whole idea.
Basically, it means the bike can run on different fuel blends, including ones with a lot of ethanol like E85. And the key here is that ethanol is renewable, unlike gasoline.
So it's helping us move away from fossil fuels one ride at a time.
Exactly.
Okay, last question for now. The article mentions that the CB300F is fuel injected. Does that really matter?
It does. Fuel injection makes the engine more efficient, helps it run smoother, produce fewer emissions, and use less fuel overall.
So it's a win-win-win. Okay, but I know there are some Honda fans out there who might be thinking, wait, how is this different from the CB300R? They sound pretty similar.
Yeah, you're right. They do share some similarities like the engine size. But the CB300R is more of a naked sports bike. It's got a more aggressive style, and it's designed for a more performance-focused ride.
Makes sense.
The CB300F, on the other hand, is all about comfort and sustainability.
So it really comes down to what you're looking for in a motorcycle. Do you want sporty thrills or a more relaxed, eco-conscious experience?
Exactly. It's all about finding the right fit for you.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up part one of our deep dive into the Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel. We've covered a lot of ground from the engine to the fuel to some of the practical considerations, but we're not done yet.
Right. In part two, we're going to take a closer look at ethanol itself and what it means for the future of fuel.
Stay tuned for that. All right, welcome back. We're ready for part two of our deep dive into the Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel. Last time, we talked all about the bike itself, but now let's get into the fuel. Ethanol. It seems like a pretty big deal for eco-friendly vehicles.
Yeah, it definitely is. More and more people are seeing it as a real alternative to fossil fuels. But to really get it, you need to understand how it works.
Okay, so walk me through it. Where does this ethanol stuff come from, and how do they even make it?
Imagine a giant brewery. Right. But instead of beer, they're pumping out fuel. It's mostly made from plants, like corn or sugar cane, sometimes even agricultural waste.
Okay.
And then they put it through this process called fermentation, kind of like how they make beer or wine, actually.
Wow. So we're basically filling up our tanks with, like, fermented plant juice. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is kind of wild when you think about it like that.
But what makes it better for the environment than regular gasoline?
Well, it has to do with the carbon cycle. See, when you burn gasoline, you're releasing ancient carbon that's been trapped underground for millions of years. That's what adds to the greenhouse effect.
So it's like adding more carbon to an already full piggy bank.
Exactly. But with ethanol, the carbon that's released when you burn it, it's part of this natural, ongoing cycle. Because the plants that they use to make the ethanol, they absorb that carbon from the atmosphere when they were growing.
Oh, I see. So it's like a closed loop. Air to plants to fuel and then back to the air.
Right. Of course, you need some energy to grow and process those plants in the first place.
Yeah.
But overall, it's still a much smaller carbon footprint compared to fossil fuels.
Got it. So zooming out a bit, where do you see this whole flex fuel thing going? Is it like a temporary fix, a bridge to something bigger, or is it here to stay?
That's a tough question. There are a lot of factors at play. But I think flex fuel tech is definitely a crucial part of how we're moving away from fossil fuels. It gives us options.
Especially in places where they're still working on electric vehicle infrastructure. It lets people cut down on emissions right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a stepping stone between traditional gasoline vehicles and that vision of an all-electric future. But, it's not a perfect solution.
Right. We can't just ignore those issues around ethanol production, like how much land it uses and the potential impact on food prices.
You're right. Those are definitely things we need to think about. Sustainability means finding a balance between what's good for the environment, the economy, and society.
For sure. So is ethanol production getting more sustainable?
Well, there's this thing called second-generation biofuels, and it's pretty exciting. They're made from things that aren't food, like agricultural waste, wood chips, even algae.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it takes away that competition for land and resources that we use to grow food.
Okay, so it sounds like we're still figuring things out, but flex fuel is a big part of the transition.
Absolutely. We're constantly searching for new ways to make things more sustainable, and flex fuel is definitely a part of that journey.
Okay, but let's bring it back to motorcycles for a second. Are there any special advantages or challenges for flex fuel tech with motorcycles compared to, say, cars or trucks?
Well, one advantage is that motorcycles are already pretty fuel efficient.
Oh, right, because they're smaller and lighter, they don't need as much energy to move.
Exactly. So when you combine that with a cleaner burning fuel like ethanol, you get even bigger environmental benefits.
Makes sense. So it's like a double win for the environment. But are there any downsides?
I think the biggest challenges are the space limitations and the design constraints that come with motorcycles. You can't just stick a giant fuel tank on there to compensate for the lower fuel economy of E85. That would totally mess up the handling.
And it wouldn't look very cool either.
Exactly. Plus, you have to make sure all the materials in the engine can handle ethanol. It can be a bit corrosive.
Oh, right. I didn't think about that.
So it takes some clever engineering to get the right balance of performance, sustainability, and durability.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's get back to the Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel. We've talked about how it's powerful, got that smooth gearbox and all the safety features with the torque control. But what's it like to actually ride? How does it feel?
The author of the article really emphasized how comfortable it is to ride, especially for commuting. And remember, they even mentioned a friend with back problems who found it really comfortable even on longer rides.
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty impressive. It sounds like Honda put a lot of thought into making it comfortable to ride.
They definitely did. It wasn't just about adding an eco-friendly engine. They actually cared about the
For
experience.
sure. And speaking of experience, let's not forget about the style. Those colors, sports red and matte access gray metallic, are pretty sleek.
Yeah, and that little green FlexTech decal's a nice touch.
It's subtle, but it makes a statement.
Exactly.
Okay, but before we get too carried away, what are some things potential owners should keep in mind? Anything practical we haven't covered yet?
Well, as we mentioned before, that availability of E85 fuel can be an issue, especially for longer trips. You really have to plan your route.
Right, wouldn't want to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. And also, that torque control feature we talked about. It's important to really get to know how it works. Maybe practice a bit in a safe area first.
Good point.
And remember, like we discussed earlier, regular maintenance is super important for any flex fuel engine. It'll keep it running smoothly for longer.
All good advice. Okay, so as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I'm starting to see this Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel as a turning point. It feels like the start of a whole new chapter in motorcycling.
Yeah, it definitely feels like performance and sustainability are starting to go hand in hand.
It's a pretty exciting time for motorcycles. And we're back. It's the final part of our deep dive into the Honda CB300F Flex-Fuel. We've talked about the bike, we've talked about the fuel. Now let's talk about what it all means for the future.
You know, it's pretty amazing to see how the motorcycle world is embracing sustainability. But it makes you wonder, are these flex fuel bikes, like the CB300F, are they just a step on the way to everyone going electric? Or is flex fuel here to stay?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Like we see all these electric motorcycles coming out, promising zero emissions, a quieter ride. It all sounds so futuristic.
It does.
But then you've got flex fuel, which seems like a more practical solution for right now, something that works with what we already have, like a bridge between gas and electric.
It reminds me of what's happening with cars, how you've got electric cars, hybrids, and then those cars that run on alternative fuels, they're all kind of competing. Maybe we're headed in the same direction with motorcycles.
Yeah, and that variety is important because not everyone's ready to go all electric just yet. Like some riders might be worried about how far they can go on a charge or finding charging stations or even the cost of those electric bikes.
You're right. Flex fuel is definitely more familiar. It's easier to get into. You can start making a difference without completely changing how you ride.
Exactly. And don't forget, the technology behind ethanol is still developing. We talked about those second generation biofuels, the ones made from stuff that isn't food. That could really change the game for flex fuel.
Absolutely. It could make it even more appealing. And who knows what else they'll come up with. Maybe we'll see even more advanced biofuels, or maybe even motorcycles that are both flex fuel A&D electric, like a hybrid.
That would be pretty cool.
It would. The point is, the industry is really innovating. They're trying all kinds of things to make motorcycling more sustainable.
I love that. So any final thoughts on the CB300F Flex Fuel? Where do you think it fits into all of this?
For me, it shows that Honda's serious about sustainability, but they're not sacrificing performance. It's like
Yeah.
they're proving that you can have a bike that's fun to ride, looks good, A&D is good for the environment.
Yeah, it's a great example of how things are changing. It feels like we're at this point where riders can actually be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's like an invitation to make a difference, one ride at a time.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Honda CB300F Flex Fuel. It's been a pretty awesome journey. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. But now we want to hear from you. What do you think? Are these flex fuel motorcycles just a temporary thing, or are they the future of riding? Let us know your thoughts. And until next time, ride safe and ride green.